Before you watch this video, make sure you've watched part 1 of every cancelled N64 game. Though the N64 library had a poor selection of RPGs, a fair number of role-playing games were planned for the console. As well as Desert Island 64, the company Imagineer was planning a sequel to Quest 64. Come January 26th of 1999, IGN gave a preview of what was to come, giving details on the story and some gameplay ideas. Quest 64 had a mixed reception, but Imagineer aimed for bigger and better with the sequel. It would have had better visuals and overall performance, less restrictive movement, and a sidekick called The Guardian, being compared to Ocarina of Time's Epona by IGN. The game would have also had a money system in place, with players earning money from enemies and being able to spend it on new weapons and the like. It seemed to be shaping up nicely and was shooting for a release by the end of '99, but soon got the axe, likely due to Imagineer's financial issues. Only a few pieces of concept art were ever uncovered. Studio Pixel Play was working on an RPG title called Blades of Passage, planned as a launch title for the 64DD's North American debut. The game was envisioned as a 3D update to classic RPG titles such as Secret of Mana. One of the developers at Pixel Play, Richard Knight, recalled the game's troubled development on his website. When he joined the team, the game was already in a tough spot. With the DD's North American launch cancelled, devs were ordered to move any incomplete projects to the GameCube. The team had a lot of hope for the game as it was their first project. However, the game was nowhere near complete, even after 3 years of development. With its cancellation, Pixel Play reformed into Orbital Media and swapped N64 dev kits for Game Boy Advance kits. A handful of screenshots have been found for Blades of Passage, as well as the game's logo. Developer David Richardson also showcased several pieces of concept art in a demo reel in 2007. Quest for Camelot 64 was based on the titular 1998 animated film and was planned to work with the 64DD. The game was being made by Titus and was scheduled for release in the second quarter of '98. Ultimately, though, Quest for Camelot didn't get past the planning stages, and after the movie proved to be a box office bomb, the game was scrapped entirely. Unfortunately for them, Titus then devoted their resources to finishing Superman 64. A Quest for Camelot title did come to the Game Boy Color, published by Titus France, but the game was conceptually different due to the vastly different specs of the two systems. Another disk drive title was DT64, developed by Marigal and Game Studio. It appeared in a list of upcoming games put out by IGN in January '98 and was the most mysterious of the lineup. It later went under the name Bloodmaster and centered around card collecting and trading. The game was planned to be the first title to connect the 64DD and Game Boy, with the Game Boy version of DT featuring a slot on the top that connected to the console. It was shown at Space World '99, albeit only in logo form, and a display of the consoles linking together via the GB connection cable. IGN reported a release date for sometime in 2000, but the N64 version was ultimately cancelled. That said, a DT game called Lords of Genomes did come out for the Game Boy Color in 2001, exclusively in Japan. A screenshot of a blue-haired boy from the N64 version appears on the box art of the Game Boy game, indicating some carryover from the original title. Even the likes of Konami wanted to bring RPGs to the N64, such as with Dear Blue. The game's name appeared in the March '98 issue of Nintendo Power and would soon appear on other lists of N64 games in development. These would prove to be the only mentions of the game, as the name never popped up anywhere again. It's possible the game may have had some connection to another Konami RPG series called Survival Kids, which had an entry on the DS titled Lost in Blue. A soundtrack for the earlier Konami title Salamander also features a song titled Dear Blue, though its relationship to the N64 game is uncertain. The game Project Cairo was previewed by IGN in November '97 and planned for a '99 release on the disk drive. It was in development at Crave Entertainment, or rather their studio Craveyard, who had a background in RPGs, previously working in the US division of Square. Details on the game are extremely vague, though the game was set to feature a major comic book license and a popular comic artist. Crave's vice president Mark Burke said the game's more Western look would help set it apart from other RPGs that had anime art styles, and claimed the art went toe-to-toe with Final Fantasy VII. Unseen 64 got in touch with former developer Ted Woolsey in April 2016, who explained the game never got past the scenario phase. It was also revealed a well-known fantasy writer based in Britain was involved at some point, though they were never name-dropped. One RPG for the system that sparked a lot of discussion was actually a fan remake of Chrono Trigger called Chrono Resurrection. Headed by Nathan Lazar, development began in 1999, after Lazar pondered what the original game would look like if it made the jump to 3D. After brushing up on his programming skills, he set to make that dream a reality. He chose the N64 over the PS1 as it was something he was much more familiar with tech-wise, and he was a fan of Nintendo. The game would have featured two different modes, one that was more in line with the original game with a high amount of detail and a variety of 3D effects. The second mode would be in full 3D and would have a top-down view similar to the original game, requiring the console's expansion pack to run properly. It would have also had a gallery mode where players could unlock mini-games, as well as fan artwork and music tracks. Production on the N64 was halted in mid-2000 for several reasons, but resurfaced in April 2003 for systems such as the Xbox and GameCube. The 9-man team were shooting for a Christmas 2004 release, but legal troubles with Square put a stop to the project. After receiving a cease and desist, the team closed the project on September 6, 2004. RPGs weren't common on the N64, but platformers were the system's bread and butter. Though the genre was never in short supply, there could have been even more. D-Jump was a platformer being made for Dreamcast, PC, PS2, as well as the N64. Developed by Ubisoft Paris, it starred a Rastafarian character named D, jumping through various time periods and trying to find out why he's slowly turning into wood. The title had a few previews in European magazines, such as the October '98 issue of Gameplay 64. It was apparently supposed to be a launch title for the PS2 in European markets, but the game was cancelled on all platforms. The release of the original Glover was enough of a success that a sequel was underway by July 1999. However, its cancellation stems from a uniquely unfortunate slip-up. A former programmer at Interactive Studios, James Steele, posted a blog entry detailing the story behind Glover 2's axing. Publisher Hasbro Interactive had ordered a production run of 150,000 units for the first Glover. If they sold through that number, it would be seen as a success, which ended up happening and led to development for a sequel. However, Glover actually had twice the amount of units ordered, as Nintendo had a special where they were selling carts at a discount price. Somebody at Hasbro decided to put in an order for 300,000 carts, leaving the company with a pile of Glover 1 carts left over and no demand from retailers to take the extra stock. Hasbro grew to resent the brand and decided to cancel the sequel. A prototype of the game was dumped online in 2010, being around 60% complete. Tonic Trouble DD was an expansion to adventure platformer titled Tonic Trouble that would release after the cartridge version in '97. The expansion was cancelled, probably due to the DD's failure, but a sequel called Tonic Adventure was planned at one point for Dreamcast and PlayStation 2, which may have incorporated some content from the expansion. British studio Curved Logic had a platformer in the works called Jest, starring a jester's apprentice, Jax, who dreamt of becoming a jester. The journey took place in the land of Humorous, and level archetypes included the Wild West, Hades, the North Pole, and Chicago. Footage was first shown at Space World '97, with the game scheduled for a late '98 release. It made a few more appearances at trade shows in video form, before falling off the radar completely by the end of '99. Another cancelled platformer was Space Jelly. This game was in development at Software Creations, and also went under the name Moon Jelly. It allegedly began life as a concept created by the Pickford brothers, who shopped the idea around to publishers. The brothers ended up leaving Software Creations around '95-'96, but the studio continued working on the title. The game featured a character called Johnny Forbidden in a plot to save the Earth from a legion of space pirates. A few preview articles on the game noted its lack of publisher, which may be one reason the game never came out. Another platformer was Weekins, developed by Super Happy Fun Fun, though not much is known about it. NESworld.com had stumbled across the website of one of the game's developers, who talked briefly about the title. It was described as a platformer in the vein of Mario, and players could play as either a boy or girl. A small blue companion named Weekin would help the player out and could be used for combination attacks or to break out-of-reach items. The game had no press and was just a prototype, only being in development for less than a year. It was cancelled due to the team being unable to fund the project, on top of being unable to find a publisher. Besides platformers, a fair share of action games were planned for the system as well. Created by Paradox Games, The Reign of Dogs and Cats had both action and strategy elements, and was in development sometime around '98. What little is known about the game comes from one of its developers, Jeremy Townsend. His roles included project design, character modeling and animation, and team leadership. The game was his first professional project, being fresh out of high school, and he blamed its eventual downfall partially to his lack of programming know-how at the time. He also claimed to have video footage of the game, though nothing has ever surfaced. Factor 5 also had a game in the works titled Thornado. First announced in April '97, the game also went under the name Turrican 64. The original original name was changed when Factor 5 couldn't reach a deal with Turrican's original publisher and settled on a combination of the words Thornado and Thor for a new name. The story saw players defending Earth from aliens, and living up to its namesake, featured several wind-based weapons. The player could be a man or woman, and was planned to have simultaneous two-person multiplayer without the use of split screen. This would have been done by lessening the detail of the characters, with the downgrade hidden by zooming out the game's camera. N64 magazine showed a release window for '98, which was later pushed back to '99. By 2000, the project moved to GameCube, though that version never materialized either. There were also talks of a disk drive version, which again never went anywhere. One cancelled game comes from Studio Z-Axis, who worked on a title called Rollerball, loosely based on the 1975 film of the same name. Taking place in a dystopian future and centering around an extreme death sport, many of the game's moves and attacks were apparently motion captured from wrestlers and martial arts masters. The team originally shot for a '97 release, but it was pushed back to '98 and later '99, with MGM apparently telling IGN the release would coincide with a sequel to the original film. What's confusing about this is the fact that Rollerball never received a proper sequel, rather a remake that was released in 2002, which may link to the game's absence. Whatever the case, a logo and screenshot are the sole remnants of the project. There were also plans to release a version on the PS1. Another cancelled N64 game from Konami was an action game called Survivor Day 1. Officially unveiled at E3 '98, the game's name was leaked on Nintendo's own website earlier that April. Players took on the role of a genetically engineered humanoid life form, with the goal of escaping a crashed spaceship before it sunk. They also had to save a female companion trapped on board, all while fending off alien mutants who were also trying to escape. The October '98 issue of Game Pro claimed the game was 70% complete and would be out for the first quarter of '99. However, the press found Survivor's gameplay none too impressive. IGN made note of Konami bringing the game to their offices several times, and with each visit, it seemed to get worse and worse. Some issues included poor visuals, bad controls, and a terrible frame rate brought on by the game's semi-high resolution mode. Survivor itself became a sinking ship, and in December '98, Konami cancelled the game. Konami also had plans to bring the Contra series to the N64. A source from the company told IGN the game was being developed in-house and went under the name Contra Spirits 64. The only other details given were the classic Contra gameplay being remade in 3D, with the camera changing angles at times. Konami's US branch had no word on the game's existence, and by January '99, IGN's source came back with the news of the game's cancellation. The reason given was due to the Contra team disbanding and splitting up to work on other projects. Probably the title we know the least about on this entire list is Conscripts. The game was in development at Software Creations, and besides that, not much else is known about it, other than it was an action strategy title that was cancelled. The game Warspirits was in the works at Candlelight Studios around 1998 for both the N64 and PS1. The game's lead programmer, Duncan Chambers, had the task of getting the game running on the N64 hardware. Chambers believed its cancellation was behind financial troubles and being unable to find a publisher, with Candlelight fizzling out not long after. As Warspirits was still in its demo phase, Chambers himself wasn't sure what it was about either. Another action title called Deadly Honor was being made by Tech Magic and had the involvement of everyone's favorite action star, Steven Seagal. In 1993, the studio announced an action game for the Super Nintendo called The Final Option, with Seagal as the lead. The game was scheduled for a '94 release before being delayed to '95 and later being cancelled. Come the N64, Tech Magic took another crack at the concept. By the end of March '98, however, IGN reported the game was on hold and was subsequently cancelled. The title First Samurai 64 was going to be a sequel to the Amiga game First Samurai and was developed by British studio Vivid Image. First Samurai 64 had elements of exploration and action a la Tomb Raider, and players could also take on foes one-on-one similar to a single-screen fighting game. Vivid also had plans for a multiplayer mode, keeping in line with their history of multiplayer titles such as Street Racer and Scars. The game had a vague release date for '99, but nothing ever surfaced. Another cancelled N64 game was Magic Flute. This was apparently an action title in development at Sunsoft USA and had a '98 release date, with nothing more known about the project. A game based on the manga and anime Golgo 13 was in the works at Vic Tokai, which followed the life of a professional assassin for hire. IGN reported on it in June of '97, with Tokai telling them that it was 3/4 complete, possibly being ready for the end of that year. It's presumed the game was an update to an earlier NES title, but it was eventually cancelled with nothing to show for it. It may also have been a port of one of the PS1 Golgo 13 titles, but since the game was never shown, it's impossible to say without more information. One licensed title that did release on the N64 was a game based on the '96 film Mission Impossible. The original game released on the 64 in July '98, but it was planned to have a disk drive expansion where players would have access to extra levels. Though reception to Mission Impossible was lukewarm, developer Infogrames had a sequel planned. After a few months of work, the studio failed to hold on to the Mission Impossible license. The game was reworked into another licensed game for the PS2, La Femme Nikita, a French action thriller franchise. However, this game was also cancelled due to, quote, economic reasons. In January '97, TechMagic confirmed a game called RotoGunners was being made for the N64. It would have featured arcade-style gameplay and had players control a helicopter. It can be assumed it didn't get too far along given the limited amount of info. Another cancelled title was developed by the company Sapphire. They worked on a title known as Young Olympians Mythos, that was also known as, somewhat confusingly, Sapphire. It began life as an adventure title before turning into a fighter with RPG elements. It focused on 5 teenagers with the powers of the Greek gods, out to save the world from Hades. A GameSpot article claimed the game would release on N64 in summer 2000, with the possibility of it coming to other platforms. It would eventually make the jump to next-gen systems, and was going to be a part of an even larger franchise, including a comic book and possibly a TV series. All plans for the franchise were ultimately shelved. A more obscure title was Bad Company. The game's head designer was Antonio Barnes, who'd worked on other unreleased games for the system, including a title called Air Demons. It's also believed development of Bad Company took place at THQ. Air Demons was supposedly being developed by Sunsoft for '98, but aside from that, nothing else is known about these games. There was also a surprising amount of scrapped arcade revivals for the system, such as at Midway, where a Joust game was in the works. Cited as a 3D update to the '80s arcade game, the name Joust X and Joust 64 appeared in a number of magazines and website features. In January '97, IGN stated it would be out by that summer at the earliest, but nothing else ever surfaced. Joust eventually made its way to the console, in its original form via a Midway compilation released in 2000. Midway also had plans for a title called Centipede X, a shoot-'em-up that was cancelled by '97. No further info is surfaced, though it was likely a 3D adaptation of the arcade classic Centipede. Developer Foley High Tech had 3 titles in development for the system at some point, but they likely didn't get far along as the company shut down in '96. All there is to go on are their names, being Silver Squadron, Defender X, and Sinistar X. Silver Squadron is presumed to be some sort of shooter, with the other 2 titles suspected to be reimaginings of the arcade games Defend and Sinistar. There's a fair number of shooters that missed the mark on the console as well. South Park, which released as a multi-platform title but found most of its footing on N64, was going to have a sequel. South Park 2 was in the works for a time, likely falling into the same FPS style of the first game. It was announced by CEO of Acclaim Greg Fishbach on January 12, '99, just 1 month after the first game released in North America. Given that Iguana Entertainment was responsible for South Park's N64 version, it's likely they would have done the same for the sequel. Still, for whatever reason, it never came out. Another canned FPS was Unreal 64, made by Epic Mega Games. At one point, there was a port in development for the 64 DD, with the team's marketing director Mark Rain saying they'd rather tackle the DD as opposed to a cartridge. Although he believed making the game on cartridge would be possible, they'd have to make huge compromises to the game's visuals. Regardless, Unreal 64 never released, likely due to the failure of the 64 DD. This wasn't the only classic shooter to get the boot. Doom 64 had a cancelled follow-up called Doom Absolution. It would have had a strong focus on multiplayer, with a Midway rep stating Nintendo never gave them the tools to do a multiplayer in Doom 64. Development started shortly after the first Doom 64 released in spring of '97 and was cancelled nearly as quickly. In January 2019, Tim Hadelar, a level designer at Midway, posted on the Doom World fan site about Doom development stories, including facts about Absolution. He said a fair amount of levels had been completed, that the multiplayer was fully playable, and that levels took place on the moon or some similar type of surface. He cited the reasons for the game's cancellation was in part due to politics, mainly due to the Midway team putting most of their resources into Quake 64, believing it would be a smarter business decision than another Doom sequel, despite the franchise's popularity. The title Jungle Bots was a game being developed by Conceptual Realities. It centered on a desert island overrun by robotic animals, with the player given the task of hunting them down. IGN reported on the game on March 26, 1998, with the publisher Titus telling them it was planned for a Q1 1999 release. By April 12, 1999, however, Titus confirmed the game had been cancelled. This was because the game wasn't coming together like they hoped, and they thought it would be a hard sell for the international market. One of the more interesting cases of a cancelled title comes with Tommy Thunder, developed by Player One and published by ASC Games. Its existence and eventual uncovering all stems from a link on Player One's website back in '97. Said link led to their FTP site, accessible to anyone who stumbled upon it. Two files labeled robo64.zip and tommy.zip were available for download, albeit password protected. It wasn't until November 2007 when a user on lostlevels.org was able to crack open the files. Robo64.zip was attributed to the complete and released Robotron 64, and Tommy.zip to the unreleased Tommy Thunder. Recalling the project, Tommy Thunder's producer, George Weissing, explained the game was submitted to Ken Lobb during his time at Nintendo, and eventually switched over to the PlayStation, hoping to reach the scope they envisioned for the game, though production didn't get far. The reason for its cancellation was due to Player One closing up shop, with studio president Holly Herzl citing bad luck with publishers. She felt they'd bet on the wrong horse, setting their sights on Sega's Dreamcast as opposed to Microsoft's Xbox. The canned title Blade and Barrel was being developed by Kemco and Software Creations. Development on the title started April 1st of '95, with it planned as an Ultra 64 launch title named Ultra Combat in America. It was envisioned as a 3D update to the Atari title Combat and featured four-person multiplayer. The game was showcased at several trade shows in Japan and appeared in a number of European gaming magazines. Issue 106 of GamePro slated the game for a Q4 '97 release, though this never came to pass. On October 23rd that same year, IGN reported its cancellation, though Kemco had plans to revamp the game completely before this happened. The Pickford brothers' site claims after John Pickford left Software Creations, the game was picked up by a Japanese publisher and became an on-rails shooter, with the publisher canning the game not long after. Make sure you tune in next week for part 3 of this series. But did you also know that Sega unwittingly added plagiarized art to a Sonic game? Or that Sonic Adventure had a camera glitch that impacted multiple cutscenes? For more facts, check out our video on Mistakes in Sonic Games.